So Roe v. Wade has just been overturned, and I wanted to make this video to sort of explain what's going on here in America, and clear up some assumptions that are going on, because I think that there's a lot of false assumptions going on both sides of the spectrum. First of all, I think this is the most important thing to mention is that abortion has not been outlawed per se. What has happened now is that because Roe v. Wade has been overturned, the states now can decide whether or not abortion should be legal within those state lines. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing to allow the sovereign states to decide what they want to do within their own boundaries, this is kind of a problem. There are some things I think that the federal government needs to step in on especially when it comes to civil liberties and civil rights. It was the federal government that stepped in during all those terrible bombings of churches and things in the South, in Mississippi, in Birmingham, Alabama, and so forth during the 60s. When they stepped in, it made a world of difference. Now we're going to have persecution of women all across this country, and specifically in those same places, and the reasoning behind it is pretty ridiculous. And that leads me to my next point. The decision that was made here last week was not designed to strip women of their ability to do what they want with their bodies. That was not the deciding factor in all of this. Now, that's the biggest consequence of all this, right? The fact that women can't do what they want with their bodies is a huge consequence, and it's a huge violation of civil rights, and is something that needs to be dealt with first and foremost. But we need to understand why the Supreme Court did what it did. We need to understand what their motivation is, and the motivation is based purely in religious doctrine. This decision is about keeping traditional values and traditional norms in place in this country, because somehow these old, washed up, crusty fossils in silky black cloaks think that that's going to fix America. It won't. The only thing rulings like these are going to do is keep us divided, keep us separated, and keep us enslaved even further. The biggest kicker in all of this for me, and the reason why this entire decision baffles me the most, is that most people didn't even want Roe v. Wade to be overturned. If you look at the polls, the vast majority of Americans in this country did not want Roe v. Wade to be overturned. So what does that mean, right? What's the message being presented to all of us here? What can we glean from this? Well, it shows that our system is corrupt. It shows that it's broken. It shows that it doesn't work for the American people anymore. The institutions that we support with our taxpayer dollars are not working for us anymore. That should never be allowed. This can't stand. And to me, I think this is just a really obvious example of what we need to start doing in this country and why things need to start changing. We really need to come together and start finding ways to change and drastically change the way that we do things in this country. We need to change the infrastructure. We need to change the institutions themselves and the way that they operate. And after seeing this decision from the Supreme Court, I think the biggest change, I think where things are really going to start, is by changing the way the Supreme Court operates. The biggest thing, I think, would be to add term limits to the Supreme Court. I mean, no president should be allowed to just, bring a justice of his choosing to just sit there and ruin a nation for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years until he finally keels over of a coronary. Brett Kavanaugh, the guy appointed by Donald Trump, yeah, that ugly bastard's going to be in a position of power for probably at least another 3 decades. 3 decades. That's not right. It's not right. We have to stop things. We have to stop them from the inside out, and that's the only way we're ever going to get any progress done. I think people in general have just been too complacent for too many years now. There's just a lot of there's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of disinformation being spread across social media platforms, and there's just a lot of hatred and anger and frustration, but with nowhere to vent it. I think the time for us to sit there and whine to each other and complain to each other and argue with each other about what we should or shouldn't do is over. And I think that the time for action is now. So what can you do? What can you do to fix things? What can you do to better your community? First of all, join protests. I know that there was tons of protests on the 24th. There's a few more still cropping up here and there, and I know there's only going to be more as this sort of thing progresses. Apparently, Clarence Thomas, that fat fucking race traitor, is now going after the legality of homosexuality during Pride Month. That's great. And this fight is only going to keep snowballing. It's only going to get worse and worse and worse and worse. So join protests, please. Have yourself physically be heard. Another really important thing to do, something that I did a few days ago, write to your representative. They're the ones that are supposed to listen to you. They're the ones that start laws. They're the ones that are sort of the foundation work for the people's voice. You know, eventually, as these things start to get more popularized, as the people start to speak more and more, these laws start to get created, they start to get passed up, they get passed up to the Senate, and eventually they work their way up to the president himself. Do everything you can to get measures and propositions on the ballot, get people to vote, get people registered to vote. I know that, in 2016 and in a lot of 2020, voting was sort of a very big issue, that we couldn't get enough people to vote, and now it's like we need people to vote more than ever. But I think that's where change is going to start happening in this country. It's when a few people stand up and say, enough is enough. And then it starts to snowball its way all the way up to the top of the chain. Hopefully, laws start getting passed. Federal laws start becoming put into place for things that protect the civil rights of everybody. I am absolutely appalled and disappointed and frustrated with this decision. I think that I'm definitely in the majority on this one. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of argument from people about my position on this. A lot of people are very, very frustrated with this decision, and I think that is, as I said earlier, the biggest indicator that it's time for things within the infrastructure and within the system to change. But the only way they can change is if we make them change. Complacency is our biggest enemy here, people, so let's, for once, just one time, right? Let's all come together and stop this shit.